A very, very warm welcome to you all. Thank you so much for coming and to the first of the 2025 series of lectures. A very happy new year to you all. I think I'm still allowed to say that even now. Special warm welcome to our guest speaker tonight, which is Professor John Beckett, who's the Emeritus Professor of English Regional History at the University of Nottingham and the author of this big tome, Nottingham, The History of Britain's Global University. We have very well, sorry?
400 pictures.
400 pictures, okay. A warm welcome also to all our other invited guests, lots of academic guests and medical guests. It's fantastic to have you all here. I'm absolutely thrilled. We've got past deans, we've got current deans, we've got all sorts, so many professors in the room, it's just daunting. A very warm welcome also to Paul Swift. Now, Paul is a archivist, Nottingham archivist and local historian, and Paul wrote Sawbones to Keyholes, which is the history of the presidents of the Magpie from 1828 to 2002.
Yeah, that's right.
And he signed my book, so that's good. And we're in the process of trying to update that with all the current presidents, recent presidents. I want to thank Dr. Caroline Anderson, who's a retired GP and also was an associate professor at the medical school, for all her hard work, because actually she's done an awful lot of organising for tonight. And this is your baby, really, isn't it? So thank you very much. And Caroline is she's kindly agreed to lead a sort of panel discussion, short panel discussion after the lecture afterwards. So that should be very interesting. There are a few sort of bits of business I'm afraid I've got to go through. So first things are, obviously, if there's a fire alarm out the front door, turn left, muster place is at the cafe. Apologies. The only apologies I've got, I think, are from Professor Claire Sharp, from Jim and Susanna Lowe, and I can't think of anybody else. Has anybody else heard any? Sorry?
Ian Hall.
Oh, Ian Hall, right. Oh, and Donald MacArthur. Thank you very much. So briefly, we had a fabulous lecture by Professor Scarlett McNally last December. Really interesting. And fortuitously, she'd written an article which was published a few days later in the BMJ. And in fact, it details all the things she discussed, and it's really worth a read. So if I could direct you to that article, there is a link to it in the minutes and also on the website. I'd like to draw your attention to the next big social event of the year, which is the Magpie Burns Night. And this is kindly arranged by Donald and Mary MacArthur. It's held at the Holy Spirit Social Centre in West Bridgford. £35 a ticket, haggis, kilts, whiskey, Scottish dancing, fun. Please, please do come and join us. There are booking forms here. You can also download them from the website. And if you want to, you can email admin at magpie.co.uk and also get a form. There is another social event in March on a Sunday. It's an early morning piano recital at the Theatre Royal. And if you'd like to join us, you just book, please, directly. Join us in the auditorium, and then we have coffee and cake afterwards. So I don't think there's much else to report. I would be most grateful, obviously, for any donations that people can make to Doctors in Distress, which is my chosen charity. There is a Just Giving link there. And I also want to tell you, I'm really, really excited about this. The next lecture is going to be given by Professor Camilla Hawthorne, who is the chair of the Royal College of GPs. This is the Mitchell Memorial Lecture, and she's going to be, and it's a joint venture with the Vale of Trent faculty of the Royal College of GPs. And when I went to the Royal College of GPs annual conference last October, Wes Streeting came to talk to the audience, and he was very articulate, and even I thought he was quite inspiring. But actually talking the talk and walking the walk are very different things. And this is exactly what Camilla is going to talk about. So it should be a very interesting evening. So I urge you to attend. So without more ado, on to tonight's talk. And over to you, Professor Beckett.
You should never clap before the talk. Thank you very much. And I want to start by asking you a question. And if the answer is, well, I won't tell you what the answer is. Is there anybody in this room who would willingly be willing to say that they had never been in a Boots store? Gone very silent, hasn't it? I wonder why this is, and hopefully I'll be able to say a little bit more about this as we go. I would just say, though, that I do remember a few years ago, under the late, when Sir Colin Campbell was the Vice-Chancellor, even he was seen in a Boots shop. Even he, though it has to be said it was Christmas Eve. And I think you can all guess what he was desperately trying to find out. But tonight I'm going to talk about Sir Jessie Boot under the title. Caroline and I dreamt this title up, and I now think it's probably not the best one we could have done with, but you know, hey ho, we're saddled with it now. But there is, yep, there is it. There is Jessie Boot on the top left, and his wife Florence, and underneath them the church on the island of Jersey where they were married in the 1870s. There's something you'll recognize, that logo. Oh, gone backwards, never mind. And I'm going to say quite a lot about this building when we get there, because of the funding. And this building, Florence Boot Hall. Anybody been in Florence Boot Hall recently? Yeah, not too recently. It's well worth being aware of the fact that all those young ladies who are apparently trying to jump out of the windows probably would have been in trouble with the warden, since the warden for most of the last 100 years was Mrs. Russell Gebbet, and boy, did she get it. So that's Florence Boot Hall, which Jessie Boot always claimed was funded by his wife Florence. I'm not saying it wasn't, it's just that all the money came from him really, even though he assigned it to other people. Before the First World War, Boot's attention to philanthropy was under 2 or 3 headings, and this is one of the ones he most played about with, as it were. Played about being an unfortunate pun, because this is the organ shown here in the building on the right there, the Albert Hall. I think many of you will know the Albert Hall. It was burned. The original was burnt down in 1876. But along came Boot, and he was responsible for much of the rebuilding of the building itself, and then of the presentation of this Binns organ, which is still there today, which he paid for because he was a great patron of music, and he liked the idea of people being able to go and listen to music without losing all their money in the process. And in particular, he had seen Binns organs elsewhere, and he was determined that this money should go in that direction, hence this organ. The other pre-war development under Boot was the Dorothy Boot homes for people who'd suffered in war. These again opened in about 1908, but were funded by Jessie Boot. So what you can pick up at this stage is that even before the war, he was responsible for some fairly major construction issues. But after the war, he came into his own. Now, without wishing to impugn those who are no longer with us, let's just say that Jessie had a good war. And indeed, Boots had a good war, because there were an awful lot of things that the Boots Company plc produced that were needed on the Western Front and indeed in other parts of the war. And the result of that was to be seen in much of Jessie Boots' activities after the war. So this is the building which I'm sure you recognize in the centre of Nottingham, which was the original building of the Nottingham, well, they call it Nottingham Trent University, but actually this was the Nottingham University. And if you really want to get yourself into a muddle, then try and work out the relationship between the University of Nottingham, Nottingham Trent University, and several other versions of the title as well. So it's a bit complicated, but that was the building from the 1870s. And that, of course, was the later building, which we'll come to in a moment. This is Boot with his family. He married late in life with a lady called Florence Rowe, and she was brought up in Jersey. And if you want me to tell you how they came to meet, I think the answer is probably that they were given the opportunity of meeting and they took it. I can't see any other reason why Jessie Boot would find himself a wife in Jersey with which he had no other connections. There on the left of this image is Florence Boot, and on the right is John Boot, who was also known, or better known, as Jack. Now think about that. Jack Boot, yeah, okay. And he went off to the First World War. He was very successful in that time. But his father, Jessie, who he sat next to there, didn't rate him. Reckoned he was not up to doing the job of succeeding to the title of the Boots Pure Drug Company. The two girls I've temporarily forgotten the names of, but they both had houses on Jersey. You always have to say in Jersey, don't you, to get it right. So that was the family outside the house called Plaisance, which is on the south side of the River Trent. And that would be them relaxing, though Jessie does not strike me as someone who relaxed a great deal. And this was to be his lasting memorial, which we'll come to again in a little bit more detail in a moment. But this is the main part of the university on University Park. And that was the land that went with it. And this was it's not very bright, you may not be able to see it, but this is an image of of what Boot was trying to do. You'll see it says plan of the University Park Boulevard and playing fields. I'll explain this as we go along. Boot was very keen on trying to get people to enjoy themselves. I don't think he enjoyed himself very much at all, partly because he had very serious osteoarthritis, against which he had spent a lot of time being unwell. But when he had the opportunity, he was always on the lookout to acquire land and to acquire property. And here you've got a couple of examples of this on the top left and top right. The War Memorial on the embankment in Nottingham, just opposite just opposite the Nottingham Forest football ground. Well, we could do a small cheer, given how well they're doing this season. And then on the bottom two of these pictures, there's people having a Sunday afternoon walk along the embankment, which Boot was very keen on. And that's one of the reasons he spent a lot of time at Plaisance, because he could then see people enjoying themselves. And he couldn't enjoy himself very much because of his infirmity, but he liked to watch other people. And he liked them to enjoy themselves. Now, is anybody prepared to put their hand up and say, yes, I swam in the Lido, and yes, it was very warm? Always works a treat, that one. Here we have the Lido. It was never called the Lido in those days. It was actually the swimming pool. You can probably see it says at the top, the swimming bath. Lido only came in as an example in this country in the 1930s. And this was one of Boot's offers to Nottingham, and you can see that there were lots of very cold young people in it, and some climbing out. It was in some ways ahead of its time. It was the first idea of swimming baths which would have not just water but also a social side. But in other senses, it was quite out of date by the time it was built. If you look at the Roman arches down the right-hand side of this image, you have to compare that to the way that outdoor swimming pools were being created by that time. But Boot was very keen on the idea of creating a model village. Now, this is not a sort of pie in the sky idea. In doing this, he was following some of the people who he worked with in other areas, the Cadburys, for example, in Birmingham, and the Lever brothers in Ellesmere Port. These people saw themselves as creating communities, and that was what Boot was trying to do as well. And part of that was to provide the infrastructure, because if you just build houses, there's nothing for people to do, and they get fed up and bored and end up going to their doctor for the usual things. So what he had to do was to try to create this area of activity. And part of that, which again you find at Bourneville and Ellesmere Port, part of that was this building, which was the Tea Pavilion. Now, Tea Pavilion seems a bit low-key, but all the others were doing it, so Boot wanted to be in on the act. You'll be aware of the fact that it's now gone, apart from two bits and pieces of it, because it went. There is the new lakeside, and there is the rest of the area. I don't know if I can remember how to use the red button, which I think I probably can't. Did we decide there wasn't a red button? There is no red button, so I can't press it. But if your mind's eye enables you to see what's going along here, that is University Boulevard. Yeah, University Boulevard makes sense to most of you. Yeah, and then down here was the road down to across the Beeston Canal, which is just there. And then up here, you've got tennis courts, and you've got what Boot did was everything to do with activity and so on. And on this side, the university sports grounds are still there, and they were really Boot's first gift. And you'll see on this image, on the left-hand side, the 1920s pavilion, sports pavilion, and then the newer one in the middle, and with the clock tower of the university. All of this from Boot. He wanted young people to be busy enjoying themselves. So the Boots Company also had extensive games and other facilities down on the embankment. And that was also part of the, came out quite well, so I used it as a picture, but it's part of what he was doing. And then this one is also likely to give you a bit of a heart attack if you're not, but can you see what there is just here? What? Yeah, but we didn't get the tram till 2005. So what was it doing there at that stage? Well, what Boot had done here was to buy up the land, to extend the lake on the right-hand side there, to put in the University Boulevard, and part of that ran along rails, and those rails were put in as part of his new idea for getting people from the centre of Nottingham out to his model village. Because if they were going to live there, not only had got to build lots of houses, but he'd also got to give them these facilities. And so this led to the building of the University Boulevard, though it didn't become that until some years later. And initially it was a private enterprise. Boot paid for it. He didn't expect anybody else to pay. He put the money up. And there again we have other examples of the buildings that he was responsible for. And of course, there's also, I don't go into this today, there isn't the time, but here again, we have all of this, the drugstores and so on, this one in the centre of Nottingham. Now, the other thing I find fascinating by Boot at this time is in 1920, which I'm going to come to in just a moment, in 1920, Boot had to retire. Well, I think Boot didn't want to retire, but Mrs. Boot said he was going to retire, so he had to retire. And they moved to live in Guernsey. And in the time that they were in Guernsey, basically he had 10 years of life there. And he continued to show interest in what was happening here in Nottingham, as well as new interests of his in Jersey. But the level of detail to which he went, I think, is really quite startling. This is Boot, Jessie Boot, writing to a man called Schimmeld, who was then the university registrar, in January 1929. Now, you might think that Boot might have something better to do than to take an interest in the bath mats, sponge baskets, water jugs, and also Lady Boot would like to help out. And we're writing to Smart and Brown about the waste paper baskets. Can you believe that? This is the man who'd made an absolute fortune from pharmacy, and he's worrying about waste paper baskets. I want to get something really nice in the way of clocks. There we go. That was how he set it up. And of course, the reason he does this is that by the time he reaches Jersey, he is effectively crippled. He can barely move, and he has to be carried around. So he doesn't want to do anything that exposes himself to a wider world. So we find that other things that happened, he didn't participate in at all. He never, from the time he went to Jersey, he never addressed people in front of eating. Any eating or drinking that went on had to be behind closed doors, as far as he was concerned. But his mind was still 100% active. So although he couldn't get about, although he was too ill, he could at least have the opportunity of working out the size of waste paper baskets in Florence Boot Hall. Anybody been in Florence Boot Hall subsequently and seen the same waste paper bins? Maybe they've gone by now. But that was what Boot did. He sat in his, whatever it was, in Jersey, and he thought of things, and he came up with ideas, and then he brought in his secretary or amanuensis who came in and took down all the detail, and then the letters were sent off. The reason that this bunch of letters to Boot, from Boot to the registrar, is that because they were university, the incoming letters were part of the university, they went into the archives, and so we don't have Schimmel's replies, but we do have Boot's comments, and they're all stashed away on the Kings Meadow campus. So that's what he was up to, and then he came to the conclusion that the only way to get the university built was to pay for it himself. So here is the image of the laying of the foundation stone of the Trent building, and then the arrival of the King and Queen, King George V and Queen Mary, to open it. And because I haven't got a thingamajig, but you might be able to see just down in this corner here, the paparazzi. You thought that Diana invented paparazzi. In fact, all those guys are up on the steps. So they've climbed up a pair of steps to take the pictures. So there the King and Queen are going into the Trent building. There's the... Surprising how high the tower is. It takes a bit of walking up and down, I can tell you. We've moved on more swiftly than I imagined. Never mind. And here was the branch of Boots in Jersey, which is where really Florence Boot took on much of the responsibility because her husband couldn't move far. So there she is with the daughters on the left. She always looks to me in portraits as being rather grim. But maybe if you were married to Jessie, you would be rather grim, I don't know. So what else did he do? Well, here we go. Very quickly, this is the Hugh Stuart Hall. Any of you in Hugh Stuart Hall? Yep. Did you know that it was originally improved as a residence for the principal? The principal being Hugh Stuart, and so when he died en route from New Zealand, they tarted up or paid to tart up the house, and that's where he went to live. Or this house on Broadgate, which was originally part of the property linked to Florence Boot Hall, but is now the University Air Squadron. And just to make sure he's got enough space for himself, this is the Villa Millbrook in Jersey, where Boot lived out the final years of his life. But in Jersey, having arrived, he didn't take too long to get down to business. And here we have the playing fields that he paid for, both the area itself and also the buildings, and other areas that he was responsible for. Again, we find him always sending information, never being present. So Lady Trent, as she was by then, did all the opening and went to all the events while he stayed at home. That's these are images of Jersey, and that one as well, I think, and that one. And then That's the Lalique Church. Some of you will have heard of that or seen it. Lalique was a French designer, and believe it, help, what's happened? Believe it or not, I don't know what I'm believing anymore. You know what's happened? Hey. Sorry about this, folks. I'll proceed in an orderly manner as soon as we can. Yep. So to be honest, down to about 1886, he hadn't been all that successful, even though he'd taken over his father's business way back in the 1850s. He hadn't been a huge success. The big thing, I mean, I didn't actually say this, but I should have done perhaps. The big break is the First World War. All those drugs and all the other things that they had to produce. And he had the whole lot streamlined very quickly. He could see what was going to happen, and he got on with it. And I don't know how much money he made from the First World War, but my guess is that it was in several figures. I think that really sums him up. And that's why I think he was giving so much money away after the First World War, because, well, he got more than he expected.
I think his other great success was
Yep.
factories
Yep.
right where the Nottingham station.
Yep.
And he realised that to reach, look at the location of food stores in town.
Yep.
And he was able to get goods at much lower cost than everybody else.
Oh, he's a very shrewd businessman. I hope I haven't given any other impression than that. But he's very shrewd. He knew what he was doing. But his real breakthrough is first in the 1880s, but really after the First World War. He does, and then one of the things I was sort of saying about this model village was to move it down to the site which is now in Lenton and Beeston across the border there. And the whole idea was to have a lot more space, so everything could be brought down from the Boots Island site in the middle of Nottingham, and they would all work there, but they would live there as well. Model villages were there to be lived in, to enjoy, to have sport, to have activities, and also to work. And if you've anybody here been to Bourneville or one of those sites, you'll know that was the kind of thing that they did. And Boot was doing exactly the same. And he reckoned that that was the way he was going to make it work. But just hopping on, by the end of his life, Florence Boot decided to put up a memorial to him, and this was the memorial by Lalique, by a French designer. Interestingly, it was put up in an Anglican church. They had married in an Anglican church, but believe it or not, you don't have to believe it, I don't think Jessie Boot was ever an Anglican. I think he was probably always a Methodist. Certainly his strictures in the way that he lived seems to be like that. And then, of course, Boots is one of the three big companies to develop between the wars in Nottingham. And that is Jessie Boot's grave. Has anybody been there? It's in Jersey. The trouble is that once you get to Jersey, if you want to find it, you need to find a guide, not a girl guide, but someone who can actually show you where it is, because it's right up the back of a mountain, carefully hidden. And the writing around the plinth is to show all his family, those who, for one reason or another, decided to go with it and ended up in there. But it's I do think it's a sort of act of homage for anybody who's a student at this university. But I do recommend that you find somebody to show you where it is rather than try and actually do it yourself. The usual story is that if you ask for the house where Nigel Mansell lives, remember him, then you can find him next door. So that's the phrase really about him. Our great citizen, Jessie Boot, Lord Trent, before him lies a monument to his industry. That, the angle of the way, that shop, that before him was what he'd managed to do of this new model village. He put up the Lido, he put up the tea rooms, put up all those sporting facilities. I didn't name half of them. And then behind him, says the quotation, an everlasting monument to his benevolence. And that's on that plaque, which is on the left-hand side of this slide. That was what he did. He did come back to England a few times. Most notably, he came back in 1929 for the opening of the Trent building, the official opening, which I showed you a couple of slides. But even then, although he was in the building, he was in the Great Hall, he wouldn't be seen with the King and Queen because he couldn't drink tea with them because he couldn't hold his cup. So he was in one room and they were in the next room. And to be honest, I have no idea whether they went through and said hello or not, or just cleared off home before they knew what was happening. But there it is. That's the man who, and you can. This is one of this is one of Denham Young's portraits. But look carefully at, if you will, at his hands, as drawn by Denham Young, and I think you can see that what the artist is trying to get over there is the fact that he had this arthritic condition. I'm told, I'm sure there are people who know better than me, but I'm told that if you look at the hands and you translate that into the rest of the body, he would not have been able to sit up like that when this was taken, so that the artist was taking some liberty in order to get him to look like he probably wanted to, rather than, and has just left this little bit in. May not be true, but certainly I've heard it from more than one source. There they are, husband and wife. She outlived him by quite a number of years, which is not surprising because he was 15 years older than her. And there's the family on the left, one or two other images, and there, of course, his great monument, which is the Trent building of the University of Nottingham. Does anybody know why it's called the Trent building? Ah, you're cheating. You know the answer to.
Because it's named after.
No.
Wasn't it?
No.
Oh, I always thought because he was.
Okay. Well, we might come back to that in a minute. I'm not quite sure whether I've got any more slides here. It looks like I've come to the end of the. Yeah, I have. Okay, I think I should stop there and let you ask questions or pose. Oh, I didn't say why. Sorry, the Trent building was originally University College Nottingham. In other words, there's the building down in the middle of Nottingham, still there, part of Nottingham Trent now. And then there was, as a result of Booth's legacy, there was this new building on the campus, which you've probably all seen, at least I hope you have. And it remained the case that new building was called University College. That's the name that had been given to it right back in the 1870s. So it's now called, at this stage, it's then called University College. And but when the change came, when the Portland building was put up, the decision was taken that they needed to rename the Trent building in order to distinguish it from University College. And so what they did was that they agreed to rename the Portland building as the Portland building, or to name it, and then to rename the University College building as the Trent building. But that's why it came. But the Trent building was not actually named after Jessie Boot. It was named after his son John Boot, which has all sorts of other implications. Sorry? Well, it has all sorts of other implications as to why they did that and who took the decisions. But that's really what it amounted to. And that's why it's been the Trent building ever since. But everybody thinks it was named after Jessie Boot because he became Lord Trent shortly at the time of the opening of the Trent building. But it wasn't.
Remember to say that and the other point is that his donation to the Nottingham.
And as you say, Woodthorpe Park. I did actually have that in my notes, but left it out. So I won't pursue it any further. But yes, there's basically 4 parks. There's Woodthorpe Park, which was opened in a very strange way because they didn't really open it officially until the King and Queen arrived in 1929 or something.
I've actually got
Yeah.
the first. They were actually staying at
Welbeck.
Welbeck.
Yeah.
And they came into Nottingham, gateway into the city.
Yep. So it's that absolutely enormous. Every time I read those figures, I think, how on earth did the teachers manage?
Yeah. Well, they all were transported in by the rail to the old children's station.
They still had to walk up to the park.
Yeah, it was wonderful. It's wonderful piece of history.
Yeah.
As I said, 10,000 children.
Yeah.
And when it was Centenary Day at
Yeah.
We've got 3 people from the chapter in your book about the medical school. Here, without the university. So what year did the medical school?
Well, life really started in the mid-18th century with the opening of the General Hospital, as it then was, down on, what's the name of the street? Centre of town. Standard Hill. That was when they first had the notion of hospitals, really. And you basically, if you went into hospital, you went in to die. But at least they looked after your passage to the next world. But that was it, and it becomes quite an important hospital as time goes by. There's a very interesting piece around about 1918 when there was a major explosion in Chilwell, the ordnance depot there, and all sorts of people were carted, literally carted some ways. They didn't have ambulances, all the way to the General Hospital. And there's, I've seen the list of those who were alive, those who died 3 days later, and so it's a pretty horrendous business. And that went on. But the only hospital really, well, no, that's not true. The big hospital was the General, but then there were separate hospitals for eyes and maternity and so forth, all of which were, the intention was to put all that lot together in one big hospital. And that one big hospital was going to be what we see today as the QMC. That did kind of happen, but it didn't happen in the way that was anticipated. And the size of the enterprise was such that almost immediately it was decided that they couldn't do what they had wanted to do, which is to pull down this campus and sell it all off, because there weren't going to be enough beds and wards and all the other things. And so what actually happened was that the new hospital was built. It was gradually opened. It took about 20 years. Some of you remember better than I will, but until it was finally opened by Her Majesty the Queen in about 1984. And even then they were adding to it, as they still have done, of course, even so. And then at the same time, the effort was going into, from 1963, was going into the creation of a medical school. And I've got a wonderful photograph, which I thought was in my presentation and wasn't, so I only found out when it didn't appear. This wonderful thing called the medical school. It's actually a caravan. And one side it sort of says in, and the other side it says out, or something similar to that. But immediately you see this picture, what you sort of think is this is a bit of a sort of treadmill, really. But that's where all the first tranche of medical school students were trained, and that was very much where it started. And then because the money came in the 1960s, when the government was really running out of ideas as to how to deal with the fact that it had got the National Health Service wrong, then gradually they started to build bits more, and then, well, you know better than I do now after that. I mean, we could have a whole discussion on just the number of individual places that were opened up after that.
Which is right, well, we're delighted to present John Beckett about a subject really close to our hearts. And you mentioned all the sport, actually. Today, as this year, Nottingham University is the top university for sport, isn't it? It's even overtaken Loughborough. And the David Ross Sports Village is very, very impressive. So actually, his legacy is pretty strong. Anyway, we're going to have a discussion panel now. There's 3 senior medical school personnel, but also a bit of audience participation, because as Jane said, we're overrun with professors and VIPs. So Professor Tony Avery is a recent medical school dean, GP, so he was previous top dog at the medical school. David Walker, I mean, most people will know these people. David's an original medical student, I think, aren't you?
I have graduated.
Yeah, well, yes, I think you have that. Yes, so you became a paediatric oncologist and an international brain tumour researcher. And Bakula Patel, hi there. Bakula's a GP, but she's current lead for communication skills at the medical school. So I thought it'd be really interesting to find out, just to jump forward and find out where we are now, where we've come from. Also, there's a few other VIPs, there's quite a few others VIPs, some on Teams as well. But we ought to mention there's several 1970s medical students here. David, we've talked about. All these people have been presidents of the Medical Society. Sue Ward, can you shout? Wave your hand. Sue Ward, Hobson Garney, David Ralson. Where are you, David?
John Ralson.
John, sorry,
John Ralson up the back there.
There you are, there's John. Yeah, John. Doug Black. Doug Black was a GP and he was responsible officer for all the other GPs at some point. He's got some stories to tell. And Helen Percival, GP. And Arthur Lacey as well. One of the originals. Also, not a medic, but played rugby with the medics, Reg Dennick. Yeah. Reg is previous professor of medical education, a lead pastoral tutor. He watches cricket now, don't you? Yeah. Okay. Other medical schools, senior management team, Margaret Jones, who was previously head of primary care, Mandy Hampshire.
Mandy.
Yeah, Mandy, a very challenging role. You are, okay. Yes. Yeah, good. Well, you'd have been on that list then. So as the admissions dean, you've got a hugely challenging role. We really thank you for that. Stan, who is one of our colleagues. We've got Paul Eddington here, who's been a clinical sub-dean. Apologies, we've got from Ian Hall and Peter Toghill, but we've also got the current postgraduate dean, Jonathan Corn. Yeah, so what a houseful. And the latest recruit at the medical school, mustn't miss her off. Latest recruit, first year medical student, no, not actually a first year medical student, but actually the dean. The dean of the medical school is Professor Claire Stewart. She's the current top dog. Thank you for coming, thank you. One other person, though, who's non-medical, but has already shown his insights, Martin Bryant. Martin is a historian. He actually was director of boot stores nationally in the early 2000s. And the company was at zenith at that point. And one of the things he did very early on was got all the senior management team to go on the onto the shop floor, didn't you, to get experience? So hopefully you can give a good perception later on. So each panel member, now then, you haven't had much warning about this. Could you say your main contribution to medical school, reflections on the talk, and how it relates to the medical school now, but also our medical society, the Medici Society? Because who are we? We are the local society. We're supporting Nottinghamshire GPs and consultants. We've also got associate membership fee for junior doctors. But what we're trying to do is invigorate the relationship between our society here and the medical school as a result of this meeting. Hopefully there'll be some follow-up, and hopefully we can meet in the Medici Lounge at Queen's and have a further discussion. So, there you go. Who wants to go first? Do you remember the 3 things I've asked you about?
Well, I'll try. So, so I came in 1992 as a lecturer in those days where you could apply for a lecturer post and get in on your potential rather than having to have millions of papers and things like that before you. And I was very, very excited because the reputation of Nottingham Medical School being one of the sort of foremost places in terms of medical education. And it was interesting talking to Claire Stewart just earlier, about to do a revision of the curriculum, which is sounding very, very exciting, and designed to put Nottingham right back there at the top in terms of innovation. So that's something very exciting. And from the start, I had a mixed teaching, lecturing, teaching research role, but led on undergraduate general practice education. I was very involved for the first few years in the teaching and development side. So it's very exciting for me to be part of Nottingham, the Nottingham curriculum, and very much supporting that and supporting students. So I developed my career, moved more into the research side of things, and headed the then Department of General Practice for about 14 years. And then when the School of Medicine was, you'd have thought there's always a School of Medicine, but there's always been these reorganisations. When the School of Medicine was formed, then I took on the role of Director of Research, which at the time felt quite pretty good for a GP doing that, but I was very welcomed by other colleagues. And then when John Atherton moved to be Pro Vice Chancellor in 2015, I became Dean of the Medical School, which was a great privilege. One of the best jobs I've done in my career. As Claire will know, it's very, very hard work, but it's just amazing to be in that position, be in a position that you can make things happen. And I think in that role, I was very supportive of both the teaching and the research, and it was great to be involved, particularly with the student and the student body who are fantastic. So it's been very much aware of the history. I mean, Ian Hall, it's a pity that Ian's not here, because Ian does a very great talk, which many of you have seen on the history of the medical school. But starting out with the caravans across the road from where the medical school is now, and to see how things have developed over time, and the progress that's been made. So your final thing was the link in terms of the society, I suppose.
Yeah.
And well, I suppose it's good that we're all here, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I mean, this is just a great organisation, and I think involving us over in the medical school over time, I think is very, 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 very helpful and very, very important. And really appreciate also, the role that MedCai has played and does play in terms of supporting even this building.
Yeah, I think we paid for 20% of this building in years gone by, which is why we have use of this lecture theatre. Yep. And also, I think that the alternation of GP consultant as presidents, and that's one of the reasons I mentioned everyone's names and all the different things that people do, hugely different. It means that we're all friends together. Yeah. And that's very different from other places and other areas, and collaboration within Nottingham is huge. I mean, I've been to Leicester, and they've got maybe 20% of their presidents have been GPs. It's very different. And I think we take it for granted. That's the other thing. We take for granted what we've got until it's not there anymore. So we need to work really hard. MedCai needs to work really hard to continue that. David.
Well, it's delightful to be here, and Tony was actually my SHO when I first came here, and then he became my boss, which is always an interesting relationship. And perhaps that's really the bottom line, is because I was a third year that came through, and actually Arthur Lacey was here already when I arrived, because he was a year ahead of me. So, when I graduated, we had a great time at medical school, and some of my friends are here. Reg and I played rugby together. He was the default fly half, because he seemed to be able to catch the ball and kick it, which not everybody else could do. So he's also a bit older, and he came from Liverpool, and we didn't understand what he said, but it seemed to work okay. And then he came back as an educationalist, so it's been a great relationship. And I think looking back over all the years, it's the relationships that actually really come through. And I brought this book, and this book is a book called The Life of Robert Graham. And when we all came to medical school, the people who ran the medical school were two people. Robert Graham was the registrar, Pamela Pam Harold was the senior administrator. And when you arrived at medical school, she knew everybody's name as soon as you walked through the door. And Robert had this fantastically disabling stutter that meant every conversation took about 3 times as long as it would do normally. And it didn't bother him at all. And he was very effective. And he developed this warmth of friendship with all the students. We all felt people cared for us. And it was a very new school. You're only 48 in the year, huge university. And they hadn't actually awarded the degree to anybody when we arrived. So it was, you were being educated on trust that you would qualify. And the person who had written the original document suggesting some new medical schools was Sir George Pickering. And Sir George was a physician at Oxford, and he had a number of people in his trainee. One of them was David Greenfield, who became the first dean. And I've got this book that a friend of mine gave me called Platt versus Pickering. And Professor Platt and Professor Pickering had a very vigorous debate on the nature of hypertension that went on a very long, long time, and where they actually ended up criticizing each other's moral values because of their misagreement. So these were people who really cared about their health care and cared about their principles. So we inherited this, and Robert, it's a nice story. He was an administrator in Africa before he came to medical school, and he writes very warmly about the strength of relationships. And I think when I came here in 1990 as a senior lecturer, Malcolm Simons, who was the dean at the time, arranged a meeting to talk about creating a society for Nottingham medical graduates. And I was invited to go along, and I didn't get out in time before they asked me to be chairman of it. Mm-hmm. And I took this on, and I'm very grateful to Rob Henderson, who's over there, who's my long-standing mountaineering friend, and he's 2 years behind me. So he's somebody you didn't mention, but he was the senior cardiologist here and led the way in developing cardiology. We ran the society between us. Deborah Bliss was one of the people who was involved, Jim Lowe, Tony Short. These are all people who in the early days knew each other for various reasons. And we ran the society, we held a number of dinners, we did various things, but it slowly became very hard to sustain. And most years ran their own reunions independently of it. And so the reunions carry on. I think people are having reunions regularly. We in our year, we have our own reunions. We get together still, many years later. So this organization is all about friendships and relationships in medicine. And so I think that's my main conclusion. And the MedChi is a continuation of that, because we built that between us. And money helps things. So if you can find some money, that sometimes makes things happen. And Claire's here, the dean. We've used some of the university's money to run some of the lectures here because it was identified by one of my senior academic colleagues that there was some spare money, and we used that. And that's what keeps the ball rolling. I'll leave it at that.
But David, you're too modest, because when you were the president in 9-10, the year before I was, and you managed to negotiate with the medical school and got some really significant sponsorship for MedChi.
That was Terry Bennett who rang me up and said, "There's some money here no one else is using."
Yeah, and then we had medical students involved and all sorts, and we went across Queen's Medical and such like. But it is difficult because people are working, and it's the ring roads are difficult. So I think that one silver lining from COVID is actually remote access, IT access remotely, Teams and such like. And we're using Teams now. And we've used Teams. One of the charity parts of the Medical Society here is that we sponsor, as you'll know, electives for medical students, and three of them gave their presentations at the AGM. One of them did his presentation from Zimbabwe to us here, with a very poor internet connection. And thank you, you did so well. It worked. And I think that we've got, I don't know whether they're actually online at the moment, but there's somebody who was hoping to join us who's actually in between breastfeeds because she's on maternity leave at the moment. There's somebody else who wanted to join us who's from Cambridge doing a PhD, was a student here, was one of my mentees. You know, it gives us so much more scope, and I'm hoping that's one of the things we can discuss when we talk to the medical school about links, how to make that work. Bakula.
So, I mean, I'm not a Nottingham graduate, but I've been in Nottingham for a long time, and I'm in my role thanks to probably two people here, which is Tony and Margaret, because I did paediatrics before I did general practice and decided to change. I came knocking on Tony's door when I was a trainee as a GP, saying I'd like to teach. And Tony said, we've got no jobs, but if anything comes up, keep a lookout. Anyway, I still remember he wrote to me, say, Bakula, there's some jobs coming up, please apply. And it was an academic general practice job, and I got it, and that was in 2001. And on and off, I've been here, supported by the university. Research didn't quite float my boat, but teaching did. And I had some conversations with colleagues about having a communication skills job. I was very fortunate to work with Karen, who also instilled that in me. And, you know, I'm in my dream job now as Director of Comm Skills, as a new role. What a great way to be at the university, what a great way to shape. And it brings it back to the stuff that we were going on about Jessie Boot. He was all about people and making other people happy and, you know, looking out. And I just think if we can do that with what we do every day in clinical practice with our medical students and bring some of those things that he did for Nottingham back to what medical students do for patients and we do for colleagues.
It's very interesting that you're a communication skills trainee lead, because one of the things that was unique about Nottingham's course in the 1970s was they trained us in communication skills, and most other medical schools gave them no training except seeing how their seniors did or didn't do it. And we actually had a training program. It was quite an exciting business because it was just the beginning of video cameras. So, and then the rooms weren't very soundproof. So you used to listen to your friends laughing in the room next door as you struggled your way through this role play. We actually learned a lot. So, you know, what you're doing now was innovative in those days for medical training.
And another thing we take for granted is that just about all the GPs and all the consultants have a teaching role here, because you had 48 medical students. How many have we got now per year?
How much?
Is it 350?
500 in total. But per year?
It sounds like 500.
It's about 400 in the clinical.
Next year, we'll graduate. Yeah, so we could be forgiven for not knowing everyone's name personally.
Absolutely.
But while I was here and Reg, we set up medical families, didn't we? Where a lot of the people had 2 people from each year group over the 5 years, so a medical family of 10. And Reg and I had great fun once a year in October, taking them all out to the pub. And that group of people, I'm still in contact with some of them. And in fact, one of them is one of the ones who's would have been online here, who's at Cambridge at the moment. So we tried to make the fact that we had so many more people more personal by having tutors so that there was a group that you relate to. But I think, again, we take that for granted, that practically all the GPs have students, don't they? And practically all the consultants and the teams have students too. So it's really important that we all work together. Right, well, thank you very much for that. Now, I'm going to open it up just for a brief Q&A, but using chairman's privilege, there's 2 people in the audience I'd like to get some feedback from. The first one, well, one being you, Claire, to introduce yourself, but the first one being Martin Bryant. Hello, Martin. You were Director of Stores in the 2000s, weren't you? So, what's your thought about all the discussions that we've had?
Well, first of all, thank you. Physical legacy that over, which was actually a really important place in women. In the late 19th century, where female education was virtually unknown, very low level, she insisted that all the girls who worked in factories,
the library,
at time off, with some form of education. About how you brought a better society. Many people may not know that part of her legacy was to create the largest lending library. Somebody may be old enough to remember the Boots Lending Library. Created in the Boots stores commercial library so that you paid a penny or so to lend a book, take a book out. Explains why don't stores in the older city centres large because the upper floors were the remnants of Florence's libraries. Years gone by, we used to curse this because what on earth are you going to sell in the space when suddenly libraries have become ubiquitous? Everybody had access to libraries through their local authorities. Other legacies, I think, of the book. The other interesting thing is you mentioned second Lord Trent, John Boot, not, as you said, not highly regarded by his father, and so not highly regarded by his father. Sold the business from under his son, and American company called Rexo. Not think John. Believe it or not, this is the history of people. American ownership for about 5 years. 1929, you're probably all aware of the huge crash on Wall Street. The owners of the then Jessie, Boots' son, John, went to a group of financiers in London and did what basically we call a management buy-in. He raised the capital to buy the shares back from his dad's business. With the second Lord Trent and ran the business extremely successfully.
So trust your children. Is that the secret?
Or make them work for their living.
Yeah.
We'll be very proud that his son actually bought the business back and made a great success.
Claire, could you just introduce yourself to the rest of the group and to maybe see how you see yourself, how you see the future of the medical school?
So my name's Claire Stewart. I'm a I those students, every single student, regardless of your There was an email from JBT to say, no, I'm not what you're looking for. However, I've got a little bit of I have half an hour's and then when about 3 months later, never on my radar. There are so many metrics.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm very aware of the time, so but we do need to have the opportunity for a few Q&As. So, anybody want to ask anything brief? Is everybody? Yeah, of course you can make it. Yeah.
Apologies, I don't know how this escaped me. It escaped my notes. Who gave £50,000? What I don't know is quite how that money. Do the maths, in other words, you work out what that. Have you done the figures?
I would say he donated, or most of that donation went to the construction of the Memorial Nurses Home.
Yeah.
By Crown King Edward VIII.
Prince of Wales is going to be paid quite a lot, really, because he was always nipping into Nottingham to meet one of his
ladies.
And that house is still owned by the university,
Grove Farm.
And also, to the gentleman at the back about Florence, I agree with every word you said, but I couldn't hear.
Okay, well, I think perhaps it's time for vote of thanks, right? So a very informative, hugely informative talk. Thank you also to the panel members, to all the audience. I think almost all the audience have been mentioned in one capacity or another. I'm going to ask for some photos, and I think what we'll do is we'll take the photos that way, and we'll have us standing in, we're the ones that move, because otherwise everybody will be moving to come down. Now, further details are in this book here. I've done quite a bit of detective work to try and find out how one accesses it. It's available via the university. You can't get it by the university bookshop. They were very apologetic when I phoned them. It's not a Blackwell's production, so they don't have it, but the university does, and it's £25. I'm sure you wouldn't mind signing some to go in them. So if anybody does want to get hold of a copy, you can get it off the university site, or ask Alison. Alison's our amazing administrator. email Alison and she'll put you in the right direction. History is learning from looking backwards, isn't it? There's a series of timing coincidences here. We talked about the boot stores. Boot stores opened 175 years ago. So this summer there's been a counterculture exhibition at Lakeside, which I'm sure Martin and quite a few others will have gone to, all about the history of boots. So that's 175 years. The iconic Trent building that you talked about, 1929, that's almost 100 years old. The medical school, 1974, so it's is it now 50 years exactly?
So 1970s.
First students,
Okay.
1970.
So when's it celebrated?
1978, though.
Yes.
Just after, yeah, to 2020, yeah.
Yeah, okay. However, Medkai beats everybody. Medkai was established in, as we've heard from yourself, Paul, 1828. 1828 means that there's 200-year celebrations coming up very soon. So we're busy preparing for that. So basically, to say thank you, there are 2 publications that Medkai has produced over the years. This one, it's the Green Book. This is 150-year history, all the way through to 1978. Right? That's for you to say thank you.
Thank you.
And could you pass me that other one over there? The one, the Sawbones one. Have it personally signed for you by the author who's here tonight. And we're hoping he's going to help us update all these ones that we're now in the process of doing as well. It's called From Sawbones to Keyholes, Presidents of the Nottingham Medico-Juridical Society from 1828 to 2002. So we thought that was a very suitable historical document for you to say thank you very much indeed. And well, we're all very grateful. Before you all go, can we just have some photographs of us?
That's great.
Could we stand there so we
It's
get
all about
us in the
relations.
foreground?
Nothing to do with administration or structures. With the lecture.